Mara Holloway stitched a dying man's chest together with borrowed thread, while the town that needed her looked the other way. Her hands didn't shake. They never did anymore. Shaking was a luxury she buried alongside her husband 2 summers back. Then, the door opened. He had to duck to get through it, 6.5 feet of mountain storm-quiet eyes, and a jaw like carved granite. He wasn't there for stitching. "Ma'am," he said, "I have got a house and no family. Word is, you've got a family and no house." If this story already has your heart, hit subscribe, drop the name of your city in the comments, and let me see how far this tale has traveled. Now, stay with me. You're going to want every word of what comes next. The morning Cade Mercer rode into Delwood, Colorado, the temperature had already climbed past 90, and the whole town smelled like hot dust and old grievances. Nobody paid him much attention at first. A big man on a bigger horse wasn't a spectacle in a territory town. Men came through all the time, drifters, speculators, railroad surveyors, with their leather cases and soft hands. They all had that same hungry look, like Delwood was something to be taken rather than something to belong to. Cade didn't look hungry. He looked like a man who had already decided something and was simply following through on it. He tied his horse at the rail outside the general store, pulled a folded piece of paper from his vest pocket, read it once, then looked up at the building across the road. A modest wooden structure with a hand-lettered sign above the door. Healer M. Holloway. He crossed the street without hesitating. Inside, Mara Holloway was arguing with a man twice her age about whether gangrene required amputation. The man's name was Doyle Pratt. He ran the livery. He was also, at this particular moment, 3 days into a foot infection he'd been pouring whiskey on instead of coming to see her. "I told you," Mara said, and her voice had that particular flatness that people who knew her recognized as the last warning before she stopped being patient. "The whiskey didn't fix it 3 days ago, and it won't fix it now. You need to let me clean it properly or you're going to lose that foot." "Women don't cut off feet," Doyle said. "I'm not a woman right now, Mr. Pratt. I'm the only trained healer in 40 miles. Now sit still." "Your husband ever let you talk to men like this?" The room went quiet. Even the flies stopped. Mara set down her instrument tray with a controlled, deliberate click. "My husband," she said, "is buried on the East Hill. You are welcome to go ask him." Doyle Pratt had the decency to look ashamed. He sat still after that. She was midway through debriding the wound when the door opened and the light coming through it disappeared. She didn't look up immediately. The door opened and closed a dozen times a day. Sick children, injured ranch hands, women who needed something they couldn't say out loud yet. But most people opening that door didn't block out the sun doing it. She looked up. He was enormous. Not fat, not soft, just genuinely structurally large. The way a Douglas fir is large, like he'd grown that way, because there was nothing around him strong enough to stop him. He had dark hair, going gray at the temples, a beard kept close, and eyes the color of a sky right before a mountain storm comes in that particular gray-green that means serious weather is coming, and it's coming fast. He was holding his hat in both hands. That more than anything was what made Mara look twice. Men in this town didn't take their hats off for her. "I'll be with you in a moment," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Take your time." His voice was deep and unhurried. It reminded her of distant thunder, something you hear before you understand what it means. Doyle Pratt was craning his neck. "Who are you?" "Cade Mercer." He said it like a fact, not an introduction. "I've got a place up on Raven Peak. Came down for supplies and to speak with the healer." "What for?" Doyle asked. "That's between me and the healer friend." Mara tied off the bandage, checked the tension, and helped Doyle Pratt off the table. She handed him a small wrapped packet of dried herbs and a written instruction she had little hope he'd follow. "Clean water twice a day. If it turns black, come back immediately. If it starts to smell different than it does right now, come back immediately. If you pour whiskey on it again, don't bother coming back because I'll hear about it and I'll be angry." Doyle Pratt shuffled past the large man in the doorway with considerably more humility than he'd walked in with. Mara washed her hands. Mr. Mercer, she said, what can I do for you? He didn't answer right away. He was looking around the room, not nosily, not rudely, just taking stock. His eyes moved over the herbs drying in the window, the supply cabinet with its careful labels, the second-hand examination table, the children's corner with its 2 small chairs. He looked at all of it, the way a man looks at something he's trying to honestly assess rather than impress. This your whole operation? He asked. It is. You run it alone? I do. How long? She met his eyes. 2 years, 4 months. He nodded like that answer meant something specific to him. Since your husband passed. It wasn't a question. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not grief exactly, more like the memory of grief, which was almost worse, because it came without warning and left without cleaning anything up. You seem to know something about my situation, she said, keeping her voice even. I don't know anything about yours. That puts us at an imbalance, Mr. Mercer. I don't conduct business from an imbalance. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the shape of one. Fair enough, he said. I'll tell you what I know and what I want, and you can decide if it's worth your time to hear the rest. He turned his hat once in his hands. I've been on Raven Peak going on 6 years. I built a house up there, good timber, solid foundation, 2 stories. It's about 70% finished. I've got cattle, a kitchen garden, good well water. I've got no debt, no vices worth mentioning, and no family. Mara said nothing. She was listening. I've got a boy, he continued, and something shifted in his face when he said it, not softening exactly, more like the weather when a front changes direction. He's 7. His mother was my wife. She died when he was 4. Fever. I've been raising him alone since then, and I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Holloway, I'm doing the work, but I'm not doing it well enough. He paused. He needs a woman in his life, not a visitor, not a hired hand. Someone real. Mara's hands stilled on the towel she was folding. And you, she said carefully, are telling me this because I hear you've got 2 children of your own. She set the towel down. Who told you that? Town talks. Town talks about a great many things that aren't its business. Yes, ma'am. But this particular thing, 2 children, 7 and 5, mother, who heals for barely enough to keep the building, that part appears to be factually accurate. He held her gaze steady. No apology in it, but no aggression either. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm trying to be straight with you because I think you're the kind of woman who'd rather have straight than polite. She stared at him for a long moment. Mr. Mercer, she said, are you proposing something to me? I'm proposing a conversation, he said, about a practical arrangement that I believe could serve us both and our children better than what we've each got right now. He paused. If you're willing to hear it. I barely know your name. That's true. But you know I came here and took off my hat and told you the truth, which is more than most men in this town have done for you in 2 years from what I can tell. That landed somewhere quiet and specific inside her chest. She didn't show it on her face. Come back Thursday, she said. Come at noon. Bring your son. She told herself it was professional curiosity. She told herself that twice more before Thursday, which was how she knew it wasn't. Her own children, Clara, 7, and Thomas, 5, were sitting at the kitchen table doing their letters when she told them a man was coming to talk. What kind of man? Clara asked. Clara asked that about everything. It was her defining characteristic and also the thing that kept Mara awake on certain nights, imagining what kind of world Clara was going to walk into with that particular quality. A rancher, Mara said, from up the mountain. Does he have cows? He mentioned cattle. That's the same as cows. Thomas said this with the authority of someone who considered the distinction important. He has a son, Mara said. About your age, Clara. Clara put her pencil down. What's his name? I don't know yet. Is the man going to be our new father? Mara stopped what she was doing. She turned around slowly. Clara was watching her with those dark, steady eyes. Her father's eyes, the thing that hit Mara sideways on a slow Tuesday when she wasn't braced for it. We're having a conversation, Mara said. That is all, and I need you not to say something like that in front of him." Clara picked her pencil back up. "You went and put on your better dress," she said simply. Mara looked down at herself. She had. Cade Mercer arrived at noon exactly, which told her something. Men who showed up exactly on time were men who'd been thinking about it for a while. She recognized that quality because she had it herself. He brought the boy. The child's name she learned within the first 2 minutes was Noah. He was 7 like Clara, with his father's build already written into his bones, broad through the shoulders. Large hands for his age, but his mother's coloring apparently because he was fair, where Cade was dark with hair the color of summer wheat. He walked behind his father the way a dog walks behind its person, not because it's been told to, but because that's simply where safety lives. He was watching Clara and Thomas with an expression of careful, practiced neutrality that no 7-year-old should have learned yet. It made Mara's chest hurt. "This is Noah," Cade said. "Hello, Noah," Mara said. She crouched down to his level, which she did instinctively with children. "I'm Mrs. Holloway. That's Clara and that's Thomas. Clara's been wondering what your name was." Noah looked at Clara. Clara looked at Noah. "Do you know your letters?" Clara asked. "Some," Noah said. "I know all of them. I can teach you the hard ones if you want." Something in Noah's face changed. It was small, like a window opening a crack to test the weather. "Okay," he said. Within 4 minutes, they had migrated to the far end of the room, with Thomas trailing behind them, and Mara found herself standing alone with Cade Mercer and the specific weight of what was actually being discussed. "They adjust fast," Cade said, watching the children. "Children do," Mara said. "They don't have the same investment in protecting themselves from hope that we do." He looked at her when she said that. "That's an honest thing to say," he said. "You told me you preferred straight to polite. I'm extending you the same courtesy." She gestured toward the chairs near the window. "Sit down, Mr. Mercer. Let's talk plainly." They sat. The summer light came through the window, and the sound of children's voices filled the edges of the room. "Tell me about the house," she said. He told her. He was precise about it, not boastful, not minimizing. 2 stories of solid pine timber on a stone foundation, half a day's ride from town at a walking pace, less than that if you knew the trail. A kitchen that wanted proper furnishing. 2 rooms finished, 3 more framed. A porch facing west that caught the sunset in a way he'd caught himself standing on more than he probably should, given that there was always work to do. "Why isn't it finished?" she asked. "Because finishing it alone felt—" He stopped. He was looking at his hands. It felt like giving up on something. She understood that in a way she hadn't expected to understand it. She didn't say so. "What would you expect from me?" she asked. "The children settled and cared for. A household managed. Your healing work, I'd expect you to keep that. It matters to the county, and it's yours. I wouldn't take that from you." He paused. "In time, if it came to feel right, a real marriage. But I'm not asking for that now. I'm asking if you'd come and see the place first." "You're asking me to come to a ranch on a mountain alone with a man I've spoken to twice. I'm asking you to bring your children and spend a day looking at something real before you make any kind of decision. That's different." It was different. She knew it was different. That was the problem with him. He kept saying things that were technically accurate in ways that made them hard to argue with. "What happens if I come and I don't like what I see?" she asked. "Then I take you back to town, thank you for your time, and we part ways without obligation. And if I like what I see, but I still say no, same answer, no obligation." He held her gaze. "I'm not trying to trap you, Mrs. Holloway. I have no interest in a woman who's been cornered into something. That's not what I want for Noah, and it's not what I want for myself." "What do you want for yourself?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I want to finish the house," he said. "I want Noah to grow up knowing what it sounds like when a family sits down to supper together, and there's enough of everybody present to make real noise." He paused. I want to stop standing on that porch alone at sunset, like a man waiting for something he's too proud to admit he's waiting for." Mara looked at him for a long moment. Something in that answer was so unexpectedly honest that she didn't know what to do with it. Men in her experience, men in this territory, in this time, didn't say things like that. They asked for things. They demanded things. They took things. They didn't sit in a healer's office and tell a widow about standing on a porch at sunset, waiting for something they were too proud to name. She became aware that her hands were folded very tightly in her lap. She loosened them. "Saturday," she said. "I'll bring the children. We'll spend the morning." He nodded once. Not triumphant, not relieved, just settled. Like a man who'd placed a bet he believed in and was willing to wait and see. That night, after Clara and Thomas were asleep, Mara sat at the kitchen table with her husband's photograph and a cup of tea gone cold. His name had been Joseph. He'd been a good man, steady the kind of quiet that was strength rather than absence. He'd gotten sick in the winter and died by spring and left her with 2 children. A rented building, a set of healing tools she'd trained herself to use, and a grief so total that for the first 3 months, she hadn't been able to remember what she'd had for breakfast on any given morning. 2 years. She'd built something out of those 2 years. Not comfort exactly, not happiness, but functionality, which was its own kind of dignity. She looked at the photograph for a long time. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said to it. Joseph predictably said nothing. She blew out the lamp and went to bed and lay in the dark listening to her children breathe through the thin wall between their rooms, and she thought about a man standing on a porch at sunset, waiting for something he was too proud to name. She didn't sleep well. Saturday came hot and dry, the kind of August morning that promised worse by afternoon. She had Thomas in front of her on the horse, and Clara behind, and they met Cade and Noah at the edge of town at 7 in the morning, as agreed. Noah appeared at the sight of Clara, with something approaching visible relief. Clara had brought a book. "I brought this in case you want to practice letters on the way," Clara told him. "That's a long ride to hold a book," Noah said. "I have very good balance," Clara said. Noah considered this, and then moved his horse closer to hers, in a way that suggested he'd already decided to trust her, which was, Mara observed the same thing she was in the process of deciding about his father, with considerably more resistance. They rode. Cade didn't fill the silence with unnecessary talking, which she appreciated. He pointed out things when there was a reason to point them out. The trail junction, the creek crossing a particular stand of aspens that meant they were halfway. He answered Thomas's questions about the cattle with patient, specific answers that treated a 5-year-old's curiosity like it deserved real information. Thomas, who had not warmed to many men since his father died, was asking follow-up questions within 20 minutes. Mara watched this from the corner of her eye and said nothing. The house when they reached it was everything he'd described and several things he hadn't. It sat on the south-facing slope of Raven Peak with the mountains behind it, and the valley stretched below and even half-finished, even with lumber stacked against one wall and tools resting against the porch railing. It had the unmistakable quality of a place that had been built by someone who understood what a home was supposed to do. She stopped her horse and looked at it. "You built this yourself?" she asked. "Mostly. Hired 2 men from town for the foundation work. The rest is mine." She dismounted without answering and walked to the porch. He'd mentioned the sunset view. What he hadn't mentioned was that in the morning facing east, the light came through the framed windows of the unfinished rooms in long pale gold columns that moved across the floorboards as slow and certain as something that had been doing it forever and intended to keep on. She stood in one of those columns of light and looked at the framed walls around her and the mountains through the open window spaces, and felt something shift in her chest that she was not prepared for and did not entirely know how to name. Behind her, she heard Cade's boots on the porch steps. He stopped at the threshold. "What do you think?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "The east-facing rooms catch the morning light," she said finally. "They do. The kitchen, is it on the east side?" "Yes, ma'am." She turned and looked at him. He was standing in the doorway with the summer sky behind him and his hat in his hands again, and that particular quality about him, that mountain stillness, and she thought, this is a real thing he's offering. This is not a performance. I'll need to see the water supply, she said, and I want to know about the nearest neighbors and how far it is to town in winter when the trail gets difficult. And I want to know what you intend to do about schooling for the children, because Clara is advanced for her age, and I won't see that neglected. Something moved through his eyes. It was quick, and he kept it quiet. But she saw it relief. Yes, but also something warmer than relief. All of that's fair, he said. Ask me everything you want to know. We've got the whole morning. From outside, she could hear Thomas demanding to know where the cows were, and Noah explaining in a surprisingly patient 7-year-old voice, and Clara's voice cutting in with a question about the calving schedule that she could not possibly have known to ask, but had apparently worked out from something she'd read. Cade heard it too. He turned slightly toward the sound. Your daughter, he said, is something else. Yes, Mara said. She is. She paused. So is your son. He looked at her. She looked at him. The morning light moved across the unfinished floor between them, slow and steady, and without any hurry at all, the way things move when they have already decided where they're going. Show me the well, she said, and she followed him out into the bright August morning, and the children's voices carried on the mountain air like they'd been doing it for years. And somewhere behind her, the unfinished house stood on its solid foundation and waited. The way solid things do for the rest of the work to begin. The well was good. She knew it before he finished explaining the timber casing was solid. The rope mechanism sound the water. When she cupped it in her palm, came up cold and clean with that particular mineral taste that meant the source ran deep. You couldn't fake good well water. You couldn't buy it or talk your way into it. Either the mountain gave it to you or it didn't. She didn't say any of that out loud. She just nodded and handed the cup back. The garden, she said. He walked her to it without comment. The kitchen garden was situated on the south-facing slope below the house, maybe a 1/4 acre, and it was doing better than she'd expected for one man managing it alone. Beans climbing their stakes, squash sprawling where they wanted to sprawl onions in reasonable rows. There were gaps where things had failed or been neglected, and she could see exactly where his attention had run out the back. Corner had gone weedy. The herbs were straggly and competing with each other for light. But the bones of it were right. Somebody who knew gardens had planned this layout, even if the execution had slipped. Your wife plant this? She asked. The question came out before she'd fully decided to ask it. She half expected him to close down the way men did when you touched something tender without warning. He didn't close down. She planned it, he said. I dug at the spring after she died because I thought. He stopped. Started again. I thought it would feel like doing something for her. Mostly it felt like something I didn't know how to finish. Mara looked at the garden for a moment. What was her name? Ruth. She had good instincts, Mara said. The layout is smart. The herbs should be moved to the east edge. They're fighting the squash for light, and they'll lose. But she was right about the slope and the drainage. Cade was quiet for a moment. I'll tell you something, he said. I didn't expect you to say that. Say what? Something kind about her. She looked at him. Why wouldn't I? Some women in your position would prefer to act like the prior one didn't exist. I have 2 children whose father existed and mattered, she said. I wouldn't give that up for anything, and I wouldn't expect anyone to pretend otherwise. I'm not going to pretend Ruth didn't exist for Noah's sake or yours. That would be a strange way to start anything. He held her gaze for a beat longer than was strictly necessary. All right, he said. The herbs can be moved. Yeah. Thomas found the cattle around mid-morning, and that was effectively the end of his interest in anything else for the remainder of the visit. Noah took him to the fence and explained the animals with a solemnity that was completely disproportionate to his age and completely charming for exactly that reason. Clara had settled on the porch steps with her book, and Mara watched her daughter glance up every few minutes toward the barn where the boys had gone checking, cataloging the way Clara always did with anything new. She was going to be a formidable woman someday. Mara was simultaneously proud of it and exhausted by what it was going to take to get her there intact. Cade appeared beside her at the porch railing. He'd been checking something in the barn and came back with sawdust on his sleeve that he didn't notice or didn't care about. "You're watching her like you're calculating something," he said. "I'm always calculating something," Mara said. "What is it this time?" She considered not answering. Then she said, "She's smart in a way this territory isn't going to be kind to. I think about that. Smart women make it fine. Smart women make it by making themselves smaller than they are, and I won't teach her to do that." She said it flat, no heat in it, the way she said things that weren't arguments, because they were already true. So I think about where she goes, and what she sees, and what she learns to believe is possible. That's what I'm calculating. Cade didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "There's a school teacher in Millhaven, 20 miles south. Better town than this one, more money in it, so the school's better funded. I've been thinking about whether to get Noah enrolled come fall. That's a long ride for a child every day. Boarding arrangement during the week. Some families do it." He paused. Both of them could go, if it came to that. She turned to look at him. He was looking out at the boys at the fence, not at her. "You've thought about this already," she said. "I think about what Noah needs," he said. "I've been thinking about it for 3 years, and I still can't solve all of it by myself. That's not an excuse, that's why I came down off this mountain and knocked on your door." Mara turned back to the valley. The air smelled like pine and cattle, and the particular dry grass warmth of a Colorado August, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, she became aware that she was not thinking about leaving. She had expected to be thinking about leaving by now. She had expected to walk through this place and find the thing that was wrong with it, the thing that confirmed what she already knew, which was that she was fine on her own, that she had built something that she didn't need to hand herself and her children to a stranger on a mountain. She was not finding that thing. That was the problem. "I need time," she said. "You can have it. I mean real time, weeks, possibly longer. I'm not making a decision about my children's lives on the basis of one morning." "I wouldn't respect you if you did," he said. She looked at him sideways. "You keep saying the right thing." "I'm not trying to say the right thing," he said. "I'm trying to say the true thing. Sometimes they're the same. And when they're not, then I say the true one anyway and deal with the consequences." She held on to that for a moment. It had the weight of a real answer. "I'll come again," she said. "With the children. We'll take a few Saturdays and see how it sits." "That's fine. And I want to speak with Noah, alone. Not today, another time. I need to know how he feels about this." Something shifted in Cade's expression. It wasn't surprise exactly. More like the look of a man who's just been shown something he didn't know he needed. "Nobody's asked him that before," he said. "Everyone asks me." "He's the one who'll be affected most directly," Mara said. "He should have a voice in it." Cade looked at her for a long moment and then nodded, slow and certain. "All right," he said. "You can talk to him." Hoon. They rode back to town in the late afternoon, with the sun dropping toward the western peaks, and the children half asleep in their saddles from the heat and the exertion. Thomas had fallen genuinely asleep, leaning against Mara's arm, and she was holding him with one hand and the reins with the other, which was not comfortable, but was a position she'd been navigating for 5 years and knew how to manage. Clara was still awake. Clara was almost always still awake. "I like Noah," she announced to no one in particular. Noah, riding beside his father, pretended not to hear this. His ears turned red. "He knows a great deal about cattle." Clara continued, apparently deciding that the conversation was proceeding whether or not anyone else participated. "He told me the names of all the ones with specific personalities. The large brown one is called Patience because she waits until all the others have eaten before she does." "That's correct," Noah said to the trail in front of him. "I thought that was interesting," Clara said. "Most people name cows things like Bessie." "Most people don't pay enough attention to cows," Noah said. Clara turned to look at Mara. The look said this one is acceptable, which from Clara was roughly equivalent to a formal endorsement. Mara caught Cade's eye over the children's heads. He was doing that not quite a smile again. She looked away before anything showed on her face. 3 weeks passed. She went back on 2 more Saturdays, and she brought the children both times. On the second visit, she spoke with Noah alone while Clara was teaching Thomas something at the creek, and Cade was doing what he always seemed to be doing, which was working on something that needed working on. She sat on the porch steps and waited, and when Noah drifted over, she made room for him to sit beside her, and they both looked out at the valley for a while without talking, which seemed to be the right approach with him. "Your father told me you're 7, she said. "In October I'll be 8. What do you want for your birthday?" He thought about it seriously. "I want to learn to read better. Miss Hollis in town says I'm behind." "Are you?" "Some." "Would you like help with that?" He looked at her. He had his father's steadiness in his eyes, but his mother's fair coloring, and the combination was striking in a way that would only get more striking as he grew. "Are you going to come live here?" he asked. So much for the gradual approach. "I'm thinking about it," she said honestly. "What are you thinking about it?" "I'm thinking about whether it would be good for my children, and whether it would be good for you." "What about for you?" She paused. 7-year-olds were not supposed to ask questions like that. Or rather, Clara asked questions like that, which had normalized it for Mara, but it still caught her off guard from a child she'd known for 3 weeks. "That too," she said. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father doesn't talk much." "I've noticed. But when he talks, he means it. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean." He paused. "He said you were the most capable woman he'd ever met in his life." Mara went very still. "He said that to you. He said it to himself. But the walls aren't thick on the second floor." Noah said this completely without guile, as though this were a practical observation about construction rather than a disclosure of something private. She didn't trust herself to respond immediately. She looked out at the valley and felt something move through her chest. Not the old grief this time, and not the familiar caution she'd built up around herself like a second skin, but something that didn't have a clean name yet and wasn't asking for one. "Noah," she said, when she was sure her voice was going to come out level, "how would you feel if we came to live here honestly? You can tell me the truth." He didn't answer right away. She watched him think about it the way his father thought about things straight on without flinching. "I'd like it if Clara came," he said. "She's not annoying." He paused. "Thomas is a little annoying, but I think that's just because he's 5. "That's a fair assessment," Mara said. "And I think—" He stopped, started again. "My father is better when there's more people. He's quieter alone in a way that isn't the good kind of quiet." Mara pressed her lips together. "All right," she said softly. "Thank you for telling me. Are you going to say yes?" "I don't know yet." "Okay." He stood up, dusted off his trousers with a practicality that was pure Cade. "I'm going to go help Clara with Thomas before he falls in the creek." He left. She sat on the porch steps in the August heat and breathed, and didn't think about anything in a forced way for approximately 30 seconds. Then she thought about all of it at once. Chamta. It was on the 3rd Saturday that the town showed her what it thought of the arrangement. She'd been aware of the talk in the way you're always aware of weather coming, not seeing the storm yet but feeling the pressure change. Delwood was a small town with too much time and too little to occupy it, and a widow being courted by a mountain man was the kind of thing that fed that particular hunger. She'd ignored it because she was good at ignoring things that didn't require her immediate attention. Then Margaret Holt stopped her outside the general store. Margaret Holt was the wife of the man who owned the largest ranch in the county, which meant Margaret Holt believed she had a social position that entitled her to say things other people refrained from saying out of basic decency. "Mrs. Holloway," she said it like a verdict. "I've been meaning to speak with you." Mara stopped. She was carrying flour, and she had Thomas on one side and Clara on the other, and she did not have time for whatever this was going to be. "Mrs. Holt," she said, "I'll be direct." Margaret Holt glanced at the children with the specific kind of look that means I'm about to say something in front of children that their mother will not appreciate. People are talking about you and that Mercer man. People talk about a great many things, Mara said. He is not a known quantity in this county, Margaret Holt said. He keeps to himself in a way that decent men don't. There are things said about why he stays up on that mountain. What kind of things? That his wife didn't die of fever. She said it with the particular satisfaction of someone delivering news they've been carrying around for a while. The street was not empty. 3 people within earshot had just gone very still in that studied way that meant they were listening to every word. Clara's hand tightened around Mara's fingers. Mara looked at Margaret Holt for a long, quiet moment. "Ma'am," she said, and her voice was completely level. "I've treated people in this county for 2 years. I've sat with sick children in the night, and I've set broken bones on men who couldn't afford to pay me, and I've kept quiet about every private thing I've learned in those rooms, because that is what a healer owes the people she serves." She paused. "What you are doing right now in the middle of this street is spreading a rumor you cannot verify about a man who isn't here to answer it. And you're doing it in front of my children." She picked up her package. "I'll thank you not to do it again." She walked away. She heard the silence behind her, and then the sounds of it breaking open, the murmuring, the shuffling. She didn't look back. Clara kept pace with her. Thomas was half running to keep up. When they turned the corner onto the side street, Clara said quietly, "Is it true, what she said about Mr. Mercer's wife?" "I don't know," Mara said. "And neither does she. That's the point. But what if something happened? Then I would want to know about it from him, not from a woman on a street corner who's never spoken to him in her life." She looked down at Clara. "You understand the difference?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Gossip isn't evidence," she said. "No, it isn't. Papa used to say that." "Yes," Mara said. "He did." She held that word Papa steady in her chest for the 3 seconds it needed before she let it pass. That evening she sat down and wrote Kate a letter. She wrote 3 drafts. The first one asked about Ruth. The second one didn't ask anything. It just told him what had happened in the street and waited to see what he'd do with it. The third one she actually sent. It said, "There is talk in town about how your wife died. I have not repeated it, and I don't intend to. But I think you should know it's being said. And I think if we are going to continue these Saturdays, that you should tell me what actually happened. Not because I believe the talk. Because you told me you preferred straight to polite, and I am extending you that same courtesy in return." She sent it with the mail on Monday morning. His response came Thursday. It was 2 pages, which surprised her. She had not taken him for a man who wrote 2 pages of anything. She read it at the kitchen table after the children were asleep. Ruth had not died of fever the way he'd told people in town. She had died in childbirth. The baby, a girl, had not survived either. He'd told people fever because he hadn't been able to say the rest of it out loud, without coming apart, and by the time he'd sealed himself back up again, the story had set, and he'd left it. He had not told Noah the truth yet because Noah had been 4 when it happened, and Kate hadn't known how to give a 4-year-old that weight. He was aware the letter said in his particular spare way that this could not be kept from the boy much longer. He was aware that he'd been wrong to simplify it. He was aware that this might change her assessment of his character. "If it does," the letter said, "I understand. I'm not going to argue for myself. I'm giving you the truth because you asked for it and because you deserve it. What you do with it is yours to decide." Mara sat with both pages for a long time. Then she got out paper and wrote back. "It doesn't change my assessment. But you need to tell Noah, soon. He is old enough to hold more than you think he is." She paused, pen over paper, and then wrote, "I'll see you Saturday." She sealed it before she could revise it. Saturday came, and this time the ride up the mountain felt different from the inside. She couldn't explain it in terms that would have satisfied Clara's precision. It wasn't that anything had changed outwardly. The trail was the same trail. The aspens were the same aspens, though they were starting to show the first pale gold at the edges that meant summer was beginning its accounting. It was that something had shifted in the space between her and this decision. The ground underneath it felt different, more solid. She was still afraid. She wanted to be clear about that with herself. She was not a woman who confused the absence of certainty for the absence of fear. She was afraid of the wrong choice. She was afraid of what it would mean to let herself want something and be wrong about it. She was afraid in the particular way you're afraid when you've already lost something enormous and you understand in your bones that enormous loss is possible and real and doesn't announce itself in advance. But underneath the fear, something else had settled in. When they came around the last bend in the trail and the house came into view on the slope, still half finished, still with its stacked lumber and its open window frames, she felt it clearly for the first time, without trying to talk herself out of it, or qualify it, or fold it up before it got too large. She wanted to finish it, not just the house. She didn't let herself dwell on that. She had children to get off horses and a morning to get through. But she knew what she knew. Cade was on the porch when they arrived. He came down the steps to help with the horses, and his eyes found hers over Thomas's head with a directness that was becoming familiar to her, and was the thing more than anything that she was going to have to decide what to do with. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. He took Thomas's reins. Noah appeared from the barn, and Clara and Thomas were moving before anyone finished saying hello. And then it was just the two of them standing in the bright September morning, with the horses between them and that particular quality between them that had no name but had weight. "Thank you for your letter," she said. "Thank you for yours." A pause. "You should tell him today," she said. "About Ruth, before more time passes." Cade nodded. He wasn't looking away from her. "I know. Do you want—" She stopped. "If it would help, I can take the other two somewhere for a while. Give you time with him." He looked at her for a moment with that expression she'd come to recognize, the one that meant he was doing the specific arithmetic of something real. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That would help." She nodded. "All right then," she said. "Let's go see what Clara's gotten into." She took the reins from him and led the horse toward the barn, and she did not let herself look back. But she was aware of him standing there, watching her go, in the way you're aware of the sun shifting behind clouds. Not dramatic, not loud, but present in the particular temperature of everything. Inside the barn, the children were arguing amiably about something to do with the brown cow named Patience, and Mara stood in the doorway and listened to them, and thought this is what a house sounds like when it has enough people in it to make real noise. She thought of a man standing on a porch at sunset, waiting for something he was too proud to name. She thought not much longer, and then Thomas fell off the fence railing he'd been balancing on, and everyone moved at once, and there was no more time for thinking, only for doing, which was generally how life worked out here and everywhere else. And Mara found she didn't mind it. She didn't mind it at all. Thomas's fall off the fence railing turned out to be nothing. A scraped palm and wounded dignity, both of which recovered within 10 minutes, the dignity faster than the palm, because Thomas was 5, and 5-year-olds had a remarkable capacity for amnesia about pain once something more interesting presented itself. The something more interesting in this case was a litter of barn cats that Noah produced from behind a hay bale, with the calm confidence of someone deploying a strategic asset. Thomas forgot his hand entirely. Clara sat down cross-legged in the barn dirt, with a composure that suggested she considered herself above barn cats, but was willing to make an exception, and within 3 minutes she was holding the smallest one against her chest, with an expression Mara had never seen on her daughter's face before. Unguarded, soft, completely undefended. Mara filed that away. She caught Cade's eye across the barn and tilted her head toward the house. He nodded once and went back inside, and she stayed with the children and the cats and let the morning do what it was going to do. She heard nothing from inside the house for a long time. Then at some point, she couldn't have marked precisely, she heard Noah's voice. Not words, just the sound of it, higher and thinner than usual. The kind of sound a child makes when the world suddenly reorganizes itself around a fact they didn't know was in it. Clara heard it too. Her eyes went to the house door and then to Mara. Mara shook her head slightly. "Leave it." Clara understood. She looked back down at the cat. 20 minutes later, Cade came out of the house with Noah beside him. The boy's eyes were red at the edges, but his face was composed the same composure he wore the day Mara met him that practiced neutrality, that no child should have to learn, but some do, because life asks it of them early. He walked straight to Mara. "She said my name was going to be Eleanor," he said. "If she'd been a girl, my mother chose it." Mara looked at him steadily. "That's a beautiful name. Papa said she looked like someone who would have been named Eleanor." He paused. "He said she had fingers like my mother's." Mara did not let anything show on her face that would make this harder for him. She kept her voice even and warm, and let him have the space to stand in it. "It sounds like your father held on to every detail he could," she said. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did your husband, when he died, did you have to—" He stopped working something out. "Did you have to tell Clara and Thomas the real thing?" "Yes," she said. "I told them the real thing." "Was it better knowing?" She held his gaze. He deserved a real answer, not a soothing one. "Not right away," she said honestly. "But later, yes. Knowing lets you grieve what actually happened. Not knowing makes you grieve a shape in the dark, and that's harder, because it doesn't have edges." Noah thought about that. His father had come to stand nearby, not interfering, just present the way he was always present, grounded, available, not crowding. "Okay," Noah said finally. He looked at the barn. "I'm going to go hold one of those cats now." And he walked away, and he was 7 years old, and he'd just been handed something real and heavy, and he was carrying it in the particular way of children who have good people around them, not easily, but forward. Mara stood up. Cade was watching his son go. There was something in his face she'd only glimpsed before fully visible now, not broken, not overwhelmed, but opened. Like a window that had been stuck shut for a long time, and had finally given. "Thank you," he said. He wasn't looking at her when he said it. "You did that," she said. "Not me. You told me to. Telling you to do it and doing it aren't the same thing." She paused. "You did it for him. That matters." He turned and looked at her then, and for a moment neither of them said anything. And the September air was warm, and the sound of children's voices came from the barn, and the mountain was enormous and quiet around them. And Mara thought, "This is a real man. Whatever else comes, this is a real man." She didn't say that either. What she said was, "Show me what's left to finish on the east rooms." And the corner of his mouth moved. And they went inside. October arrived the way it always did in the high country, without apology. The aspens went gold overnight, or that was how it felt, and the mornings acquired a bite that the afternoons hadn't earned yet, and everyone in Delwood started doing the mental arithmetic of winter preparation. Mara was doing a different arithmetic. She had enough supplies to carry the children through to spring if she was careful. She had enough patience to keep the building rented. She had 2 children who asked about Noah and Raven Peak with increasing frequency, and a daughter who had stopped asking when they were going back, and started asking about whether the schooling arrangement in Millhaven could work for 2 students who weren't from the same family. Clara did not approach things indirectly. It was both her greatest strength and the thing that was going to get her in trouble in rooms that weren't ready for her. "I'm not deciding anything based on what you want," Mara told her. "That's not fair to put on you." "I'm not trying to decide it," Clara said. "I'm providing information. About Millhaven School, about the fact that the teacher there was trained in Philadelphia and teaches natural science, as well as letters." Clara said this in the tone she reserved for facts she considered self-evident. "That is not available in Delwood." Clara. "I'm providing information," Clara repeated with perfect composure. Mara looked at her daughter for a long moment. Joseph looked back at her from Clara's eyes. He would have found this funny. She found it both funny and terrifying, which was probably correct. "Go to bed," she said. Clara went. The conversation she had been half expecting came on a Wednesday morning, not a Saturday. The door to the healing room opened, and instead of a patient, it was Cade hat in hand, and he'd ridden down from the mountain on a weekday, which meant something specific was on his mind. "I've got something to say," he said. "I can see that," she said. "Sit down." He sat. He didn't speak immediately. He turned his hat twice in his hands. She had learned to read his silences. They weren't avoidance, they were preparation. He was the kind of man who didn't say a thing until he was sure he was going to say it right. "I don't want to keep doing Saturdays," he said. The room went still. "I see," she said carefully. "I want you to come up there for good." He was looking at her directly the way he always did when it counted. "Not because I'm impatient, because I think we've been honest enough with each other, and we've both been watching long enough that more Saturdays isn't going to tell us anything Saturdays haven't already told us." He paused. "I think you know what your answer is. I think you've known it for a while. I think you're waiting for a reason to believe it's safe to say it." The accuracy of that landed in the center of her chest like a stone dropped in still water. She didn't say anything immediately. She stopped, tried again. "That's a presumptuous thing to say." "Yes, ma'am, it is. I'm saying it anyway." "You're very certain about what I know." "I'm certain about what I've watched," he said. "Every Saturday you come up there and you watch the children, and you watch the house, and you watch me, and you're not looking for reasons to say no anymore. You've been looking for permission to say yes." She stood up from her chair. She walked to the window. Not because there was anything to see there, but because she needed somewhere to point herself that wasn't directly at him. "My husband died," she said. 2 years ago I had a partnership and a life, and I knew where I was going, and one spring morning, all of it was gone. What you're describing, what you're asking me to walk into—" She stopped. "I am not afraid of the work. I am not afraid of the mountain, or the house, or the unfamiliar. I am afraid of building something again and having it taken." She heard him get up. He crossed the room and stopped a few feet behind her, not touching, just present. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been afraid of the same thing for 3 years." She turned. He was closer than she'd expected. She had to look up to meet his eyes. "Then what makes you certain enough to ask?" she said. "Because being afraid of losing something is only unbearable if the something is worth having," he said. "And everything I've seen of you for the last 2 months tells me it's worth being afraid of. So I'd rather be afraid and have it than be safe and not." The room was very quiet. Outside, someone rode past on the street, and a door opened and closed somewhere down the block, and none of it mattered the way it usually mattered. She looked at him, and she thought of Noah saying he doesn't say things he doesn't mean. She thought of a letter that said, "I'm giving you the truth, because you deserve it." "I'll need a month," she said, "to tell my patients, to arrange the building, to let the children adjust to the idea properly." Something moved through his face, not triumph, not relief exactly. Something quieter and more lasting than either of those. "1 month," he said. "And I want the east rooms finished before we arrive," she said. "Clara will not sleep in a framed wall." "They'll be finished. And I'm keeping the healing practice. We find a way to make it work from the mountain I'll ride down twice a week for regular patients, more for emergencies. I already said I wouldn't take that from you. I know you said it. I'm saying it back, so it's an agreement, not a concession." He nodded. "Agreed." She looked at him for another moment. "All right," she said. And then, because she was Mara Holloway, and she did not leave things soft when they could be clear, "I'm saying yes, Cade. That's what this is." He breathed out slowly. Not dramatically. Just like a man who'd been holding something steady for a long time and had just been told he could set it down. "I heard you," he said. "Metro." She had exactly 26 days of thinking the hard part was over. Then Victor Grayson came to town. She didn't know who he was the first time she saw him. He came through the door of the healing room on a Tuesday afternoon with a charming smile and a suit that cost more than most men in Delwood made in 3 months, and he asked very politely for treatment of a blister on his right hand that he described as acquired while traveling. Mara treated the blister without particular interest in the man and charged him her standard rate and sent him on his way. She didn't think about him again until she heard his name at the feed store 2 days later, mentioned between 2 ranchers with a tone that made her pay attention. "Grayson's been at it all week," one of them was saying. "Had 3 separate meetings at the land office." "What's he after?" Silver, same as always. Word from the county seat is he bought up 3 parcels east of the Holloway claim, and he's pushing the boundary lines. The Holloway claim. The second man's voice changed shape. That's Mercer's land up the mountain. Adjacent to it. But if the survey he's filing holds... The first man saw Mara and stopped talking. She bought her flour and walked out and stood in the October street and turned the information over in her mind with the specific calmness of a woman who has learned that panic is a luxury she can't afford, and clarity is the only tool that works in a crisis. Silver. Boundary survey. Mercer's land. She was back on her horse and riding up the mountain inside the hour. Cade was nailing boards to the east room framing when she arrived. He came down the ladder when he heard the horse and took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" It wasn't a question. It was a man who knew the difference between a regular visit and a woman riding up a mountain trail in the middle of a Tuesday. She told him what she'd heard, all of it plain and direct the way he'd told her he preferred. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, his expression had not changed dramatically, but she'd learned to read the subtler registers of his face, and something in it had gone very still in the way that meant serious weather. "Grayson," he said, "you know him. I know of him." He was quiet for a moment. "He came through this county 2 years ago, bought a parcel south of Millhaven from a widow who didn't know what her land sat on top of, paid her 1/3 of what it was worth. By the time the silver came out, she'd already spent the money and moved her family to Denver." He paused. "He's been working his way north since then." "How close is his current parcel to yours?" "Close enough." He looked toward the ridge. "There's a creek that runs the eastern edge of my property line. The original survey marked the boundary at the creek's west bank. If he's filing a new survey, he could argue the creek shifted, they do shift over years, and move the line 50 feet west." His voice was level. 50 feet in most places doesn't matter. Up here it cuts across the southern access trail. I lose the trail, I lose easy access to town. In winter that means I'm effectively landlocked. Mara understood immediately what that meant. Not just for the ranch. For the children. For the practice she'd agreed to maintain from the mountain. "Who filed the original survey?" she asked. "County office in Durango. It's 12 years old." "A 12-year-old survey can be challenged." "His can be challenged too, but he'll have money behind his challenge, and I'll have..." He stopped. "You'll have me," she said. He looked at her. "I know how to read land documents," she said. "Joseph was involved in a boundary dispute before he died. I spent 6 months learning everything about survey law in Colorado Territory because he couldn't afford a lawyer, and neither could we." She paused. "It didn't help him in the end, but I know what I learned." She looked at Cade squarely. "Can you get me access to the original survey?" "I have a copy in the house." "Get it." He went inside and came back with a folded document worn at the creases, and she spread it on the porch railing and studied it for 10 minutes without speaking. Cade stood beside her and waited and did not interrupt, which she had come to understand was one of his most fundamental qualities. He understood when silence was the most useful thing he could offer. "There," she said, and put her finger on a specific notation. The original surveyor marked a secondary reference point at the boulder formation northeast of the creek. If Grayson's new survey ignores that reference point and only argues creek drift, it's incomplete. You can't file a valid boundary challenge without addressing all original reference markers. Cade leaned over the document. "You're sure?" "No, I'm confident. That's different." She looked at him. "You need someone who can verify it. Someone with standing in the county. A lawyer or a surveyor with credentials." She paused. "Or a judge. Nearest circuit judge comes through Durango every 6 weeks. When's the next circuit?" 3 weeks. "Then you have 3 weeks to get your documentation in order." She straightened. "And Grayson has 3 weeks to do whatever he's going to do before the judge gets here. He won't wait for the judge." "No," she said, "he won't." She looked at him and saw the same understanding she had in his eyes, the recognition that this was not going to be a legal problem that solved itself with a document. Men like Grayson did not come this far with this much money behind them and allow a survey technicality to stop them. "How many men does he have?" she asked. "I've heard 3. Could be more." "Do your neighbors know what's happening?" "The ranchers east of here. The Paulson family runs cattle 2 miles east. Good people. Garrett Paulson and we've helped each other out in dry years." "Talk to him," she said. "Today if you can. What Grayson does to your access trail affects his water rights downstream. He needs to know that." She paused. "And Cade?" She used his name deliberately, which she didn't often do, and she watched him register it. "Don't go at this alone. That's not stubbornness speaking, that's practical. 1 man against 3 on a mountain trail in November does not end well, and I need you functional." Something shifted in his face. It was the same quality she'd seen before the thing that looked like being held. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "I'm going back to town," she said. "I need to check the public land filings at the county office and find out exactly what Grayson submitted before I know what we're actually dealing with." She folded the survey back along its original creases and handed it to him. "Keep that somewhere Grayson's men won't find it if they come looking." He took it. "You think they'll come up here?" "I think he paid someone to blister his hand in my office so he could get a look at me," she said. "I think a man who does that thinks 7 steps ahead. Yes, I think they'll come up here." Cade was very still for a moment. "He came to you." "Tuesday. I treated him. I didn't know who he was until I heard the ranchers talking. He was in this town looking at you. He was in this town doing his survey work, and when he heard there was a new arrangement between the mountain healer and the woman coming up from Delwood, he came to assess what he was dealing with." She met his eyes. "He's thorough. We need to be more thorough." "Mara." His voice was different when he said her name, not softer exactly, but more specific. "Don't," she said. "I'm not apologizing." "Good. Don't apologize for something that hasn't happened yet." She picked up her reins. "Get to the Paulsons. I'll send word when I know more." She mounted and rode without looking back, and she held herself straight in the saddle the whole way down the mountain, even though what was running through her chest was not calm at all. It was the particular cold alertness of someone who has looked at a real threat and understood its shape and is working out the geometry of the problem before the problem has time to become something worse. Victor Grayson had come to her door with a fake blister and smooth manners, and she'd treated him with a professional courtesy she now wanted to reclaim. She didn't waste time being angry about it. Anger was a luxury, same as panic. What she had instead was a 12-year-old survey with a secondary reference marker that a greedy man's lawyers had apparently overlooked, and 3 weeks until a circuit judge and a rancher 2 miles east who was about to find out his water rights were in the same danger as Cade's access trail. She had Clara's voice in her head saying gossip isn't evidence, and Joseph's voice under that saying, then find the evidence. She had a man on a mountain who had told her the truth at every opportunity, including the ones where the truth cost him something. She had promised that man 1 month. She was going to make sure he still had a mountain to stand on when that month was up. The county land office closed at 5 o'clock. She had 2 hours. She rode faster. The land filing was worse than she'd expected in one way and better in another. Worse, Grayson hadn't just filed a boundary survey challenge. He'd filed a preliminary mineral claim on a strip of land running along the contested boundary, which meant, if his boundary argument held, he wouldn't just take the access trail. He'd have legal standing to commence extraction work on what he'd claim as his mineral rights, which would bring equipment and crews, and the kind of organized legal pressure that a single rancher without significant resources could not fight indefinitely in a territorial court. Better the filing was dated 9 days ago, which meant he'd been planning this before he'd come to her door. The visit to her office wasn't reconnaissance, or wasn't only reconnaissance. He'd come after the filing, which meant he was confident enough in his legal position that he was already moving to the next stage. And the next stage, Mara understood looking at the filing clerk's carefully neutral face, was that Grayson intended to start survey work on the disputed strip within the week. Who certified his survey? She asked. The clerk, A young man named Aldrich, who had the energy of someone who found paperwork genuinely interesting, checked his register. Firm out of Denver, Cartwright and Associates. Are they credentialed with the territory? Yep. Has Cartwright and Associates certified any other surveys in this county in the last 3 years? Aldrich checked. Then he checked again more carefully. Not in this county specifically, but they did 3 in the county south, all for mineral claims. All for Grayson. He looked at her, then at the register. I can't say that officially. But the names on the mineral filings in the county south, could I look at those records? They're public filings, he said. She looked at them. She spent 40 minutes looking at them, standing at the filing office counter with her coat still on, reading documents in the fading afternoon light, while Aldrich pretended to be busy with something else, and was actually watching her with the expression of a young man who found this more interesting than he was supposed to find it. 3 surveys in the county south. All certified by Cartwright and Associates. All on land that subsequently produced silver. All purchased from original owners within 6 months of the survey at prices well below market. 2 of the 3 original owners had subsequently filed complaints with the territorial office. Both complaints had been dismissed for procedural deficiencies. Procedural deficiencies. She knew what that meant. She had been married to a man who died owing debts that had procedural deficiencies written all over them. She knew exactly what a procedural deficiency looked like when someone with enough money had engineered it. She closed the register. Aldrich, she said. Ma'am? If a territorial judge were to review these filings, how difficult would it be to request them as supporting context for a boundary challenge? Not difficult at all, he said. They're public record. Any interested party in an adjacent dispute could cite them. And what would constitute an interested party? A property owner in the same county with a pending dispute involving the same survey firm. He was very carefully not looking at her. Hypothetically. Hypothetically, she agreed. She put on her gloves. Thank you, Aldrich. Have a good evening, Mrs. Holloway. She walked out into the October dark and stood on the step for a moment and looked at the street and breathed. Grayson hadn't made a mistake exactly. What he'd done was what men like him always did, moved fast and smoothly, and counted on nobody on the other end being willing or able to dig into 3-year-old county records from the jurisdiction south. He'd miscounted. She had a secondary reference marker on a 12-year-old survey 3 prior disputed filings involving his survey firm and a circuit judge in 3 weeks. She also had something Grayson couldn't buy and didn't know about yet. She had Garrett Paulson's water rights downstream. She had Margaret Holt's husband, who owned the largest ranch in the county, and whose eastern boundary was not as far from the disputed strip as he might have thought. She had a land filing clerk who had not told her anything he wasn't legally permitted to tell her, and who had done it with considerable efficiency. She pulled her coat close and went to find her horse. Tomorrow she was going to need to write a letter to a lawyer in Durango and ride out to the Paulson Ranch and get back to the county office before noon. Tonight, she was going to go home, put her children to bed, and sit at the kitchen table with Joseph's photograph and say, I see what's happening. I see all of it, and I know what to do. She was not going to let Victor Grayson take that mountain, not the land, not the house, not the man standing on the porch at sunset, waiting for something he'd finally stopped being too proud to name, not any of it. The letter to the lawyer in Durango went out on Thursday morning. His name was Edmund Hale, and she knew of him the way you know of a tool you've never used but have been told is reliable through reputation, through the specific way people said his name when they needed someone who wouldn't be bought. Joseph had mentioned him once years ago in the context of a property dispute that had gone badly for someone who hadn't hired him in time. She wrote clearly and without embellishment. She laid out the boundary, filing the Cartwright and Associates connection, the 3 prior disputed surveys in the county south, and the secondary reference marker on Cade's original documentation. She told him she had 20 days before the circuit judge and asked what it would cost to have him present. Then she rode to the Paulson Ranch. Garrett Paulson was a broad-weathered man in his late 50s who had the eyes of someone who'd survived enough hard winters to stop being surprised by anything. He listened to Mara on his porch with his arms crossed and his face doing the specific kind of arithmetic that ranchers did when something threatened what they'd built. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My eastern boundary is adjacent to the disputed strip," she said. "If Grayson's mineral claim holds and he begins extraction work, the runoff from equipment operations will affect your creek water by spring. He knows that. He knows everything about this county's land and water. That's what he paid Cartwright and Associates to tell him." She paused. "He's counting on each of you dealing with him separately. One rancher at a time, one challenge at a time, until the money runs out or the will does." Garrett Paulson looked out at his land for a long moment. "You're telling me this needs to be a combined filing?" "I'm telling you that a circuit judge looking at one boundary challenge from one rancher is a different matter than a circuit judge looking at a combined filing from 3 adjacent property owners supported by documented evidence of a pattern of fraudulent survey practices across 2 counties. She met his eyes. "One of those is a dispute. The other is a case." He was quiet again. She let him be quiet. She had learned from Cade that some men needed the silence to think in, and pushing into it didn't speed the thinking up. It just knocked it sideways. "Who's the third?" he said. "I'm working on that." "You talking to Holt?" She had been trying not to think about Margaret Holt. "His eastern pasture boundary is closer to the creek headwaters than most people realize. If Grayson's extraction operation goes in on the disputed strip, the Holt Ranch loses clean headwater access within 2 seasons. Margaret Holt's not going to want to sit at the same table as Cade Mercer. Margaret Holt's husband might feel differently when he understands what he stands to lose," Mara said. "Men who've built something tend to care more about keeping it than they care about their wife's opinions about mountain ranchers." Garrett Paulson made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had gone the other way. "All right," he said. "I'm in. Tell me what you need from me." Check. Getting to Robert Holt was easier than getting past Margaret. Mara sent a note directly to the ranch office, not the house, and addressed it to Robert Holt by name, marked it as pertaining to water rights, and delivered it through his ranch foreman, rather than his front door. Robert Holt was at her healing office the next morning at 7 a.m. before she'd had her first cup of coffee. He was a different kind of man than his wife. Quieter, more practical, with the distilled attention of someone who had made money by paying close attention to what threatened it. He sat across from her and read the documents she put in front of him without speaking. And when he finished, he set them down and looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has just been told that a fire he thought was in someone else's field is actually in his own. "The headwaters," he said. "Your foreman will know the creek I mean. The one that feeds your north pasture through winter." "I know the creek," he said flatly. "Grayson's mineral operation, if it proceeds, will introduce equipment runoff into that watershed within 18 months. I'm not estimating. I'm telling you what happened to the 2 ranches downstream of his last operation in the county south. Both filed complaints after the fact. Both lost." He looked at the documents again. "You're the woman Mercer's bringing up to Raven Peak," he said. "I am. My wife doesn't approve." "I know. Your wife's approval isn't what I'm asking for." She met his gaze directly. "Your signature on a combined filing is." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Margaret's going to have something to say about this." "She might, but I'll note that if this filing succeeds, your North Pasture water supply is protected for the next generation. If it fails because you decline to participate, it won't be." She paused. "That's not a threat. That's the arithmetic." Robert Holt had the grace to look slightly amused despite himself. "You're direct," he said. "I've been told I prefer it to polite," she said. He picked up the documents and stood. "I'll talk to my lawyer today. If he agrees with your reading of the survey law, you'll have my signature by Monday. I need it by Sunday. The combined filing has to be submitted before Grayson's survey team begins field work on the disputed strip, and my information says they're planning to begin Wednesday." He stopped. "Wednesday. He moves fast," she said. "That's how he wins." Robert Holt put his hat on. "Sunday," he said. "You'll have it." He left. Mara sat down, picked up her coffee, found it had gone cold, and drank it anyway. She sent word to Cade that evening. She wrote him a brief account of where things stood, and asked him one specific question. Had anyone come onto the access trail or the eastern edge of his property in the past 3 days? His reply came the next morning, carried down by Noah, who had apparently ridden the trail alone for the first time, a fact Mara registered with a complicated mixture of pride and alarm before she focused on the message. It said, 2 men on the eastern ridge yesterday. I recognized one of them. He works for Cartwright out of Denver. They were on the ridge, not on my land. When I came out, they left. Noah is fine. The trail is fine for now. What do you need me to do? She sent Noah back up with an answer. Stay visible on your own land. Don't engage. Don't give them anything to file a complaint about. And stay off that ridge yourself. They want a confrontation, and they want it to be yours. She added Hale in Durango replied. He's coming. He says the secondary reference marker is solid, and the Cartwright pattern across 2 counties is exactly the kind of documented evidence the territorial court has been looking for. He says don't lose the original survey. She paused, and then added, the east rooms better be finished. She folded the note and handed it to Noah. You rode down alone, she said. Papa said I could. He paused. He said to tell you he's fine. I know he's fine. He said to tell you anyway. Noah looked at her with his father's steadiness. He worries about you worrying. She looked at him for a moment. Ride back carefully, she said. Keep to the main trail, not the shortcut. The shortcut saves 40 minutes. Take the main trail. He went with the particular gait of a boy who is going to take the main trail because he was told to and is mildly resentful of how reasonable the instruction is. On Saturday, Grayson came to her office again. She'd half expected it. He'd assessed her as a variable and found her to be more active than expected, and men like Grayson recalibrated. What she hadn't expected was how he'd come not alone, not with muscle, but with a lawyer and a smile, and a proposition wrapped in language so smooth it could have been oiled. The lawyer's name was Prescott. He was younger than she'd have expected, well-dressed, with the particular confidence of someone who's won enough to believe the next one is already won. Grayson sat down in the chair across from her and arranged himself with the ease of a man who believes he controls the room. Mrs. Holloway, I understand you've been making inquiries at the county land office. I work in this county, she said. I make inquiries regularly about things that affect the people I serve. Of course. The smile didn't waver. I want to be straightforward with you. I have significant respect for what you've built here. The community clearly relies on you. He paused. I'd like to make sure that doesn't change. She said nothing. She let him continue. There's a boundary dispute pending, Grayson said. These things can be resolved quickly, or they can become expensive and protracted for everyone involved. I'd like to resolve this quickly. He looked at her. The access trail is not actually central to my mining interest. If Mr. Mercer is willing to agree to a modest easement on the southeast corner of his property, a surveyed strip of approximately 30 feet, my mineral claim can be pursued without disrupting his operations. Everyone keeps what matters to them. The legal proceedings become unnecessary. She looked at him. An easement, she said. A small one. Surveyed documented fair compensation paid to Mr. Mercer for the inconvenience. How much compensation? Prescott named a number. It was not an insulting number. It was in fact a number designed specifically not to be insulting, large enough to seem reasonable, small enough to make Cade's acceptance of it feel like a compromise rather than a defeat. That was the tell. She knew it immediately. Men who were certain of their legal position didn't offer compensation. They waited for the judge and won and paid nothing. I'll relay your offer, she said. That's all I ask. They stood. Grayson extended his hand. She shook it because refusing it would tell him things she didn't want him to know yet. Mrs. Holloway, he said. You strike me as a practical woman. This territory is hard enough without fighting battles that don't need to be fought. I agree completely, she said pleasantly. After they left, she sat for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and wrote Cade a single line. He offered an easement. Don't accept it. I'll explain Sunday. M. Sunday brought Robert Holt's signature and Edmund Hale's arrival in Delwood on the afternoon stage. Hale was older than she'd imagined, late 60s, with white hair and the unhurried manner of a man who'd won enough cases to stop moving quickly because he'd learned that speed was usually a disadvantage in law. He shook her hand and looked at her documents and said nothing for 20 minutes. Then he said, "The Cartwright firm certified 3 fraudulent surveys. This is a 4th, and the reference marker issue makes the filing procedurally incomplete, regardless of the creek drift argument." He set the papers down. "Who else is signing the combined filing?" "Paulson and Holt." Hale raised an eyebrow. "You got Holt on this. His water rights are at stake. His wife is going to be furious at him. That's between them." Hale almost smiled. "The judge coming through is Martha Alcott. She's been on the territorial circuit for 11 years. She's seen the Cartwright pattern before from a different county, and she dismissed it on a technicality that frustrated her. She's been waiting for a clean case." He looked at Mara. "This is a clean case. If we file by Tuesday, we get an injunction against the survey team starting field work. Grayson can't break ground while an injunction is pending." He offered Cade an easement. Hale's expression sharpened. "When? Yesterday. That means he's spoken to someone at the territorial office and he knows the reference marker is a problem. He's trying to negotiate around it before it lands in front of a judge." He paused. "Don't accept the easement." "I already told Cade not to." Hale looked at her for a moment. "Mrs. Holloway, how exactly did you pull together 3 property signatures, a prior county documented pattern, and a procedural deficiency identification in under 2 weeks?" "I used to read for a lawyer," she said. "A long time ago before I trained as a healer. And I have a very good memory." "What happened to the lawyer?" "He moved to San Francisco. I stayed." She paused. "Can we file Tuesday morning?" "Tuesday morning," he confirmed. She rode up the mountain Monday with Hale's injunction draft in her saddlebag and found Cade at the base of the East Ridge with Garrett Paulson, both of them looking at something she couldn't see until she got closer. Surveying stakes. 3 of them driven into the ground along the creek's west bank, maybe a foot inside what should have been Cade's property line. She pulled her horse up and looked at them. "They came last night," Cade said. His voice was level. It was the level of a man exercising very deliberate control. "They put them a foot over the line," Garrett said. "Past the creek bank. That's not disputed territory. That's Mercer's land." "That's trespassing," Mara said. "Yes," Cade said. "It is." "Did you move them?" "No." He looked at her. "You told me not to give them anything to file a complaint about." "That was the right call." She dismounted and crouched by the nearest stake, looked at it without touching it. "They want you to pull them up. Then they file a complaint about interference with a legal survey, which muddies the injunction proceedings." She stood. "Don't touch them. Hale files Tuesday morning. The injunction freezes everything, including these stakes, in place." She paused. "I need you to go inside and write down the exact time and location you discovered these today, and Garrett needs to witness it." "Already have," Garrett said. He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Time location measurements from the original stake markers. Witnessed and dated." Mara looked at him. "My foreman's done some survey work," Garrett said simply. She allowed herself one breath of genuine relief. "Good. That goes to Hale today." Cade had been watching her this whole time, not the stakes, her. "You got Hale here," he said. "Yesterday. You got Holt to sign." "Sunday." He was quiet for a moment. Garrett Paulson was doing the specific thing ranchers do when they're tactfully not listening. "Mara," Cade said. "Don't," she said. "There's still a week to the judge. Don't say anything that belongs after." He was quiet for a moment longer. Then he nodded once. The nod meant all right. "We'll get there first." "What do you need me to do right now?" he said. Hale wants to walk the property line this afternoon with the original survey. Can you take him? Yes. And I need Noah somewhere other than this ridge for the next 2 days. Clara's been asking him to come to town, he said. She mentioned something about the library. Clara's been asking Noah to come to town, Mara repeated. Apparently they've been corresponding, notes through me. He said this without any particular inflection. I didn't read them. Mara decided to address that later and filed it in the category of things her daughter would eventually have to answer for. Send him Tuesday. I'll keep him in town until the injunction files. All right? He paused. And tonight I go back to town and I sit with my children and I make sure everything is ready for them to come up here at the end of the month. He looked at her. She looked at him. The stakes were still in the ground 20 feet away, a man's greed made visible, and the mountain was around them in every direction. And it was the kind of cold, clear October afternoon that seemed to insist on being noticed. The East rooms, she said. Are they done? Finished them Thursday. She nodded. Good, she said. And then, because she was who she was, I'm going to need to see them before I make any final arrangements. You've seen them half-finished for 2 months. I want to see them finished. Something shifted in his face, that not quite a smile, that she realized with complete clarity, been cataloging carefully for 2 months as though she might need it later for reference. I'll show you Thursday, he said. Thursday, she agreed. Tuesday morning. Hale filed the combined injunction at 7 a.m., before the county office had finished unlocking its doors. By noon, the injunction was issued. By 2 in the afternoon, the word was through town. Mara heard the reaction from her office. She didn't go out to watch it, but she heard it, the specific sound of a town reconsidering its estimate of a situation. She heard Aldrich from the land office say something to someone on the street in a voice too low to make out the words, but too pleased to misread the tone. She heard boots on the boardwalk outside move with a different quality than they'd been moving all week. What she heard most clearly was Margaret Holt's voice outside the feed store saying to someone, "Robert did what needed doing, that's all." The tone was the tone of a woman recasting the story, so it had always been the one she'd approved of. Clara, who had excellent hearing and no patience for hypocrisy, looked up from her letters and said, "Mrs. Holt seems very supportive of the filing." "Clara," Mara said, "I'm just noting." Note it more quietly. But the corner of Mara's mouth moved. She didn't let Clara see it. That evening a messenger arrived with a letter from Grayson's lawyer, Prescott. It was very short. It said that in light of the pending injunction and the combined filing, Mr. Grayson wished to explore an alternative resolution and requested a meeting at the county land office with all interested parties at the earliest convenience. Mara read it twice. Then she wrote back, "Mr. Grayson may address his alternative resolution to Judge Martha Alcott when the territorial circuit convenes. M. Holloway, on behalf of the filing parties." She sealed it, sent it back with the messenger, and poured herself a cup of tea that she actually had time to drink while it was still warm. Thursday, she went up the mountain. The east rooms were finished. She stood in the doorway of the larger one and looked at the plastered walls, the fitted floor, the window that Clara had already somehow claimed in her imagination, because she described it in a letter to Noah as the one that faces the reading light, and felt the specific weight of something that had been potential for months finally landing as real. Cade was in the doorway behind her. "Well," he said. "The plaster's good," she said. "I had help. Garrett's second son knows plasterwork. And the floor's level. I checked it 3 times. She turned around. He was watching her with that quality. He had the direct patient attention that had stopped unnerving her and started feeling like the most reliable thing in a 30-mile radius. "I have a question," she said. "Ask it." "The day you walked into my office," she said, "you had a folded paper in your vest. You read it before you crossed the street. What was on it?" He paused. It was a longer pause than his pauses usually ran. "Your name," he said. "The building. A note about your husband dying and when." Another pause. And a note that said you were the kind of woman who'd want to be spoken to straight. She looked at him. Who told you that? Doc Riley in Millhaven. Said he'd tried to buy your practice 2 years ago, and you'd declined him in approximately 4 words and walked away. His mouth curved. He said it was the most impressed he'd been by a refusal in 30 years of medicine. She held that for a moment. So you prepared, she said. I didn't want to waste your time. She looked at him. This man who had come down off a mountain with a folded paper and a hat in his hands and said, I'll tell you what I know and what I want, and had meant every word of it, and had not flinched once when the words cost him something. I'm not going to be easy to live with, she said. I want to be clear about that before we're standing in front of anyone making it official. I have opinions and I say them. I keep irregular hours. I will ride down this mountain in weather you're going to tell me is dangerous because someone needs me and I'll go anyway. My daughter will argue with you. My son will put things in his pockets that he shouldn't. Clara's going to be a lawyer someday, he said, or a judge. Probably both. And Thomas is going to be the kind of rancher who names every animal he owns. Almost certainly. She paused. You understand what you're taking on. I understand exactly what I'm taking on, he said. That's why I came down and knocked on your door. She looked at him for a long moment in the finished room, with the October light coming in the east window. Then she said, 2 weeks from Saturday. He stilled. Not a month, she said. The east rooms are done. Hale says the judge will rule in our favor. My patients are arranged. She paused. 2 weeks. He breathed out slowly, not dramatically. The way he did everything grounded certain specific. 2 weeks, he said. I'll need help with the moving. Garrett's boys, he said immediately. I'll ask them. And I want to be married before we arrive, not after. I won't bring my children up here without it being settled properly. I'll speak to Pastor Greer tomorrow morning. She nodded. And then, because she had been honest with him at every turn and saw no reason to stop, now she said, I am still afraid. I know. I want you to know that it isn't about you. I know that too. It's about... She stopped. Started again. It's about the fact that I've had something good before, and I know what it feels like when it goes. And this... She gestured at the room at him, at what they were building. This is bigger than what I had before, so the losing of it would be... bigger, he said quietly. Yes. He moved then, not fast, not dramatic, just the deliberate way he moved toward everything that mattered. He came and stood in front of her, and he was very close, and he put his hand out and she took it, and they stood like that in the finished room that smelled like plaster and pine and the specific clean cold of a Colorado October. I can't promise you nothing will go wrong, he said. I can't promise you that it lasts forever because nobody can promise that honestly. But I can promise you that I'll be standing next to you when it does, and that I'll tell you the truth before I tell you the comfortable thing, and that I'll never make you smaller than you are to make myself feel bigger. She held his hand, and she thought of Joseph, and the grief that had cut her to the floor, and somehow without her permission, grown into the life she'd built, and the children she was raising, and the woman she'd had to become to manage it. She thought Joseph gave me those children. This mountain is going to give them the rest of what they need. All right, she said. It was the same thing she'd said in her office weeks ago. I'm saying yes. But this time it had a different weight, a different finality. Not a beginning, but a commitment, which was the harder and more honest word for it. He held her hand, and the mountain was quiet around them, and 2 weeks suddenly seemed like a long time, and also like no time at all. I'm going to go check on the children, she said. He nodded and released her hand. She walked to the door and paused and said without turning, The porch view at sunset. You were right about it. He didn't say anything, but she felt him smile. 2 weeks passed the way significant time always does, both slower and faster than it should, depending on which hour you were standing in. The days leading up to the wedding were not romantic in the way that word usually gets used. They were practical, relentless, and occasionally absurd. There were patients to transfer supplies, to box a rented building, to arrange for Dr. Riley's nephew, who was coming down from Millhaven to take over the Delwood practice. There were two children who handled the news of the marriage with completely opposite temperaments. Thomas asked if Noah's cow patients would let him feed her by hand, now that they were going to be family, and Clara went very quiet for exactly one evening, and then came to Mara's bedside at 9 o'clock at night and said, "Papa would have liked him, I think. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean." Mara held her daughter's hand in the dark and said, "No, he doesn't." "I think Papa would say that's the important part," Clara said. "I think he would too." Clara went back to bed. Mara lay in the dark for a while longer and had a conversation with Joseph that was entirely internal and entirely real, the way those conversations had been for 2 years and 4 months. She told him what was happening. She told him that his children were whole and growing, and that Clara was going to terrify courtrooms someday, and that Thomas had learned to name cows. She told him she was still afraid, and that she was going forward anyway, which she believed he would have called the correct order of operations. The room was quiet. It was always quiet. But it wasn't the kind of quiet that meant alone. Check. They married on a Saturday morning at Pastor Greer's church, with Garrett Paulson and his wife as witnesses, and the 4 children in the front pew being various versions of solemn. Noah had his father's posture and his mother's coloring, and wore his best shirt with the top button done up in a way that suggested he'd been told to, and was honoring the instruction while clearly finding it restrictive. Thomas sat between Clara and Noah, and kept asking in a stage whisper if it was over yet, and Clara kept telling him to be quiet, with the specific authority of someone who had already decided she was the senior child in this combined arrangement. The ceremony was short. Kate had asked for short, which Mara had agreed to, because she had no patience for performance, and Pastor Greer had the good sense to give them the words that mattered and leave out the ones that didn't. When it came to the vows, Cade turned to her and said them in that voice of his unhurried certain, the words landing with the weight of things that have been thought about carefully before being said out loud. She said hers back the same way. When it was done, Thomas said loudly and with complete sincerity, "Is Noah my brother now?" Noah looked at him with the expression of someone who has been an only child for 7 years and is recalibrating. "Yeah," he said, "I reckon so." Thomas looked satisfied. He had apparently needed that confirmed officially. Clara caught Mara's eye, and the look on her face, that particular combination of composure and something much younger and softer moving underneath it, was the thing Mara carried with her out of that church, and would carry for the rest of her life. They moved up the mountain the following Tuesday. Garrett's 2 eldest boys came with a wagon, and the operation took most of the day, and involved Thomas nearly falling off the wagon twice a crate of medical supplies that turned out to be heavier than it looked, and Clara directing the placement of furniture in the east rooms with a specificity that Garrett's eldest son, a young man of 20 named Will, bore with considerable patience and what appeared to be genuine admiration. Mara filed that away too. By evening the house held all of them. It had the quality she'd described to Cade weeks ago, real noise enough people to make it. Thomas and Noah arguing about where the cats should sleep. Clara reading out loud to no one in particular from the book she'd carried up the trail. Cade at the stove making supper with the focused quiet of a man who'd been cooking for 2 and was now cooking for 5 and was taking that adjustment seriously. Mara stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him. He hadn't heard her yet. He was moving through the kitchen with the specific competence of someone who knows exactly where everything is, and he was listening to the noise of the house. She could tell by the quality of his stillness, the way his shoulders held slightly differently than they did when he was alone with a task. He was listening to it the way you listen to something you've been waiting for. She thought of the porch at sunset. She thought of a man standing there alone in the particular quiet that wasn't the good kind of quiet. She walked into the kitchen and picked up the bread knife and started slicing without being asked, and they cooked supper side by side without talking much, and it was ordinary was the word. It was completely ordinary in the specific way that only things you've waited a long time for can be. 3 days after they moved in, the territorial court ruling came. Hale sent it by messenger express from Durango. Judge Martha Alcott had reviewed the combined filing, the Cartwright documented pattern across 2 counties, the trespassing evidence, and the procedural deficiency in the boundary survey. She had ruled in favor of the filing parties on all points. Grayson's mineral claim was invalidated. The boundary remained at the original survey line. The trespassing stakes were to be removed at Grayson's expense. And she had referred the Cartwright survey firm to the Territorial Attorney General for investigation of fraudulent practices. Not just dismissed. Referred. That was the part Hale had underlined. Mara read the letter at the kitchen table. Cade was standing behind her. He read it over her shoulder once, and then straightened up and was quiet for a moment in the way that meant real weight. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he said. She set the letter down. "Hale's going to need his fee." "I've got it." "Half is mine," she said. This was a joint operation. He didn't argue. She had noticed over the preceding weeks that he did not argue about things that were true. It was one of his more useful qualities. Garrett Paulson came by that afternoon and shook both their hands with the energy of a man who had just seen something work that he'd been willing to bet on but hadn't been certain of. He brought his wife, who brought food, and there was a version of a celebration that involved 5 children. Will Paulson had apparently come along, and considerable noise, and Thomas falling asleep at the table mid-bite in the way that 5-year-olds do when the day has finally exceeded their capacity. Clara and Noah sat together at the far end of the table, doing something with a piece of paper that they moved out of sight when Mara glanced at them. She did not investigate. She was choosing deliberately to extend the same courtesy to her daughter that she'd want extended to herself, the space to manage something privately until she was ready. Will Paulson helped clear the table. He did it without being asked and without commentary, glancing at Clara twice in the process. Clara appeared not to notice. This Mara understood meant Clara had noticed completely. She caught Cade's eye across the table. He tilted his head very slightly toward Will. She tilted hers back very slightly. The entire exchange took less than 2 seconds. This was new. She had not had someone to have silent conversations across a table with in 2 years and 4 months, and she had not known she'd missed it until this exact moment. She picked up her coffee cup so her face would have somewhere reasonable to go. The celebration wound down by early evening. The Paulsons headed home. The children went to their rooms in the graduated way of children who have been told bedtime is coming, but are deploying every available delay tactic. Thomas wanted a story. Noah. It turned out also wanted a story, but had more dignity about admitting it. Clara said she didn't need a story, but sat in the doorway of the boys' room with her book while Cade told one anyway, which Mara observed from the hall with the particular quality of attention that she usually reserved for things she was trying to memorize. Cade told the story the way he did everything spare direct without unnecessary embellishment. It was something he'd apparently told Noah before, a story about a rancher and a mountain and a winter that tried its worst and failed. And the version he told tonight had some additional characters in it that hadn't been there before, Mara suspected, because Noah's occasional glance toward the doorway confirmed he was listening for whether they matched up with reality. Thomas was asleep before it ended. Noah made it to the last line. Clara closed her book and went to her room without saying she'd been listening. Cade came out into the hall, and they stood together in the quiet of the house. "You're a decent storyteller," she said. "I had good material tonight," he said. She looked up at him. "The ruling today. What did it actually mean to you, not practically? What did it mean?" He considered it seriously. "It meant that what I built isn't going to be taken. That what I put into this land 6 years of it holds." He paused. "It means Noah's going to be standing on this property when he's grown, and he'll know he's standing on something real." "That's what you were afraid of," she said. "Underneath everything. Not Grayson specifically. That something would take it before it could be passed on." He looked at her. "When did you work that out?" "Fairly early," she said. "It's the same thing I was afraid of, just from the opposite direction." He was quiet for a moment. "I read somewhere once," he said, "that fear and love point at the same things, just from opposite ends." She looked at him for a long beat. "Where did you read that?" "Ruth's Bible." She marked it. He paused. "I read it about 100 times in the years after she died and didn't understand it until about 6 weeks ago." She held that carefully. "6 weeks ago," she said. "When you told me you were afraid and went forward anyway," he said. "That's when I understood it." The house was quiet around them. It was the good kind of quiet, full, not empty. She had not felt the good kind of quiet in 2 years and 4 months. And now here it was, present and specific, in a half-finished house on a Colorado mountain that smelled like pine and new plaster and supper recently cleared. She took his hand. He held it. They stood there for a moment and let the quiet be what it was. What neither of them knew yet, what arrived 11 days later in a letter forwarded through Hale from the Territorial Attorney General's office in Denver, was that the investigation into Cartwright and Associates had moved faster than anyone expected. Because Cartwright and Associates, it turned out, was not just a survey firm. Hale's letter laid it out with the particular controlled precision of a lawyer who understands that some information needs to land carefully. Cartwright and Associates was a subsidiary operation incorporated 18 months ago, owned through 2 intermediate holding companies by a Denver investment group. The investment group had 3 named principals. One of them was a territorial legislator named Douglas Fairchild, who sat on the Land Commission that had the authority to approve or deny mineral extraction licenses across 6 counties. A legislator on the Land Commission, owning the survey firm that generated the fraudulent claims that cleared the path for the extraction licenses that he then approved. Mara read the letter at the kitchen table on a Wednesday morning, while Cade stood at the counter and the children were at their lessons with Clara playing teacher in the way she had assumed that role with total authority approximately 48 hours after arriving on the mountain. She read it twice. Then she said Cade. He came to the table. She handed him the letter. He read it. She watched his face do the specific thing it did when something significant was being processed. The stillness that meant the calculation was running underneath. "Fairchild," he said. "He was at the Land Commission meeting in Durango last spring," she said. "There was a notice in the county paper. I didn't pay attention to it at the time." She paused. "He approved Grayson's initial extraction license, before the survey was even filed here." "Which means the survey was never the actual claim," Cade said. "The survey was the paperwork. The claim was already approved by the man who owned the firm that wrote the survey." "Before we ever knew Grayson existed," she said. They looked at each other across the table. "Hale says the Attorney General wants statements from all the filing parties," she said, "and he wants the original survey and the trespassing documentation. We have all of that." "I know." She folded the letter with the precise movements of someone keeping themselves methodical in the presence of something large. "This is bigger than Grayson. This is a legislator. This is going to go to the Territorial Assembly." "Yes," he said. "Are you ready for that?" He held her gaze. "Are you?" She looked at him. She thought of Aldrich at the land office carefully not telling her things he was legally permitted to tell her. She thought of the widow in the county south who'd sold her land for 1/3 of its value and moved her family to Denver. She thought of 2 dismissed complaints with procedural deficiencies written all over them by a system that had been arranged to protect the man running it. "I've been ready for something like this since Joseph died, owing debts that had someone else's fingerprints on them that I could never prove," she said. "Yes, I'm ready." He nodded once. "Write Hale," he said. "Tell him we'll give him whatever he needs." She pulled paper toward her and picked up the pen, and Cade sat down across from her, and they worked through it together. What they knew, what they could document, what timeline they could reconstruct. And from the next room came the sound of Clara's voice explaining something to Thomas and Noah in the patient but firm tone of someone who has decided that ignorance is a temporary condition she intends to correct. The letter took 2 hours. When they were done, it was thorough and specific and careful. And it was the kind of document that Mara had learned to recognize, the kind that was built not to impress, but to hold up, the kind that didn't crack under scrutiny, because every word in it was true. She sealed it. Cade took it to the morning writer before noon. The testimony they gave over the following weeks was not dramatic in the way that word usually means. It was meticulous. Hale came up to the mountain twice, and they sat at the kitchen table and went through everything. Every date, every filing, every document, the exact words Grayson had used in the offer he'd made in her office, the exact measurements Garrett's foreman had taken of the trespassing stakes. Garrett came and gave his statement. Robert Holt came and gave his, with a thoroughness that suggested he'd been waiting for someone to ask him the right questions for a while. Margaret Holt did not come. What Margaret Holt did instead was show up at the mountain on a Saturday afternoon without announcement, stand on the porch, and speak to Mara for approximately 10 minutes with the specific difficulty of a woman who has changed her mind about something and is not accustomed to the sensation. "I said things in the street about Mr. Mercer that I did not have grounds to say," Margaret told her, looking at a point slightly past Mara's left shoulder. "You did," Mara said. Margaret stopped. Revised. "I was wrong to say them." Mara looked at her. She thought about several things she could say in response, selected none of them, and said instead, "Mrs. Holt, your husband stood up when it counted. That matters more than what was said on a street." Margaret Holt looked at her, then directly for the first time. There was something in it, not warmth exactly, but the specific acknowledgement of one capable woman recognizing another across the distance of different choices. "You are not what I expected," Margaret said. "No," Mara agreed. "I gather I'm not." Margaret left. Cade appeared behind Mara in the doorway. "That happened often." "People discovering I'm different from what they assumed," she said. "Often enough." He put his hand on her shoulder briefly and went back inside. The Territorial Assembly convened in November. Douglas Fairchild resigned his seat on the Land Commission the week before the session began, which Hale said was a confession wearing the costume of a procedural exit. The Attorney General's investigation was formally opened. Cartwright and Associates surrendered their territorial certification. 3 of the fraudulent surveys they'd produced, including the one that had targeted Raven Peak, were voided by the territorial court in a single ruling. Grayson left Colorado Territory before the first snow. Hale sent word with a single line at the bottom of the legal summary. "The widow in Denver has been notified that her land may be recovered through a civil filing. She has an attorney now." He did not say who had arranged that. He didn't need to. Mara read that line 3 times. She folded the letter and went to find Cade. He was on the porch in the late November cold, looking out at the valley the way he apparently did when he needed to think, and she came and stood beside him and told him what Hale's letter said. He listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Good," he said. It was a simple word for something large. But that was how he operated. He didn't dress things up beyond what they required. "Hale says the civil case for the Denver widow could take 2 years, she said. "Then it takes 2 years. He paused. "She's not alone in it anymore." "No," Mara said. "She's not." She stood beside him in the cold, and they looked out at the valley together, and the mountain was enormous and quiet around them in the way that it had been for 6 years before she arrived, and would be long after everything else had changed. "Are you cold?" he asked. "A little." He turned back toward the door. "Come inside. The fire's been going since noon." She didn't move immediately. She stood there one more moment, looking at what she'd ridden up to the first time in August, the half-finished house and the summer grass, and the particular quality of this place that had told her something she hadn't been ready to hear yet. It was finished now, not just the house. Everything that had needed finishing. She turned and followed him inside. That night after supper, after the children were in bed, Thomas and Noah in their room, with the low argument that now served as their nighttime ritual. Clara in hers, with her lamp burning later than it was supposed to. Mara sat at the kitchen table, with a cup of tea, and the quiet of the house settled around her. She had Joseph's photograph in her coat pocket. She'd carried it the day they moved, and she'd meant to put it on the mantelpiece, and hadn't yet, because she'd been thinking about where exactly it should go. Not hidden, not as a wound, as a fact, as part of the story of how they'd all gotten here. She took it out and set it on the table. Cade came in from checking the barn, saw it, and sat down across from her without asking. She looked at the photograph. Joseph Holloway, she said. He was 31 when this was taken. He thought the photograph was unnecessary. He said a man didn't need a record of his own face because he saw it every morning, and that was already too often. Cade looked at the photograph. He sounds like he had a sense of humor. He did, a dry one. Clara gets it from him. She paused. Thomas gets his stubbornness. I get credit for the intelligence, but that's not entirely accurate. What do you get credit for? She thought about it honestly. The persistence, she said. The part that doesn't stop. Cade nodded. He would have done the same thing you did, she said. With Noah, telling him the truth about Ruth. She paused. It might have taken him longer. He was braver in most things than in the emotional ones. But he'd have gotten there. Sounds like a real man, Cade said. He was, she said. He was a real man, and I loved him, and he's gone, and I'm here. She looked at the photograph one more time. Then she set it gently on the table face up. I think the mantelpiece. East side where the morning light hits it. All right, he said. She picked it up, carried it to the mantelpiece, and set it where she'd said. Then she stood back and looked at it. Joseph Holloway, 31 years old, squinting slightly in the sun of a summer that felt like a long time ago, and was. She turned around. Cade was watching her from the table with that quality he had, the mountain stillness, the direct attention, the patience that was not passivity, but simply the certainty of a man who understood what was worth waiting for. I want to tell you something, she said. All right. I came up here the first time looking for the thing that was wrong with it, she said. I was planning to find it and use it to confirm what I'd already decided, which was that I was fine on my own. I know, he said. You know. I watched you look, he said. Every room, every corner. You were very thorough. The not quite a smile. You didn't find anything. No, she said. I didn't. She looked at him. That terrified me more than the thing I was looking for would have. Why? Because it meant I was going to have to decide based on the truth instead of a convenient reason to say no. She paused. I'm not used to that. Neither am I, he said. But here we are. Here we are. She looked around the kitchen, the fire, the mantelpiece with its photograph, the table that had held 2 months of letters and legal documents and supper and children's elbows and the conversation she'd just had. She thought of the porch at sunset and the east rooms in the morning light and Noah's voice saying, he's quiet or alone in a way that isn't the good kind of quiet. She thought of Clara's face in the church doorway, young and composed, and something very soft underneath. She thought of Thomas asleep at the supper table, the night of the ruling face pressed into his folded arms, completely trusting, as only children can trust, that the world is being managed. She thought, I built this. Not alone, but I built it. Come to bed, she said. It's late, and you check the cattle at dawn. I know my own schedule, he said, but he got up from the chair. She walked down the hall toward the east rooms that he'd finished with his own hands in the house he'd built on a mountain that the law had just confirmed would hold, and she heard his footsteps behind her, steady and certain the way they always were. The last lamp went out. The house held its people, all of them, the living and the remembered, the new and the long-loved. And on the mantelpiece, a photograph caught the last of the firelight, and outside the mountain stood in the November dark, without apology, enormous and permanent, the way it had been before any of them arrived, and the way it would be long after. This was Raven Peak. This was what they'd built and defended and refused to let go of. And no one, not grief, not greed, not fear, not the long silence of a man standing on a porch waiting for something he'd been too proud to name, none of it had been able to take it from them. This was home. Finished, claimed, and absolutely theirs.